In this lesson, we're going to explore light and shadow. And to do that, we're going to draw a sphere. My sphere is a wooden ball that I've painted white. If you want to set up your own still life, you could use a wooden ball like this. You could use a styrofoam ball, a ping pong ball. You're also welcome to draw along with me from this still life. I suggest that you watch this video once all the way through before you begin. That might make things a little easier for you when you're drawing your sphere. In this lesson, you'll need your sketch paper. This is 18 by 24 inch sketch paper. You'll use a General's charcoal pencil. This is a 2H. You could also use an HB. You'll be using a Nitram HB charcoal stick. You could also use a B. We're going to be using a kneaded eraser and a stick eraser. And I'm also going to be using a mop paintbrush to wipe away debris on my paper. You don't need one of these. They're nice. You could use any soft paintbrush for this. The first thing we need to do is get a circle on our paper. And although I think it's good to practice drawing circles, don't worry about beating yourself up with that. So I'm going to take this little dish and I'm just going to place it on my paper and lightly draw a circle tracing this dish. And there's our circle. First, we're going to find the terminator line. Terminator line is that area on the object where the light and the dark meet. And everyone is going to see it differently, but we're going to put it in just slightly where I see it. I'm going to take my charcoal and lightly draw in where I see the form light. The rest of the light emanates off of that point, going from that white area into the darkness. I'm also going to designate the highlight here, which I see right about here. Now I'm going to put a little indicator where I see the reflected light. The reflected light is the area on the object where the light has hit the tabletop and bounced back onto the object. And I see it kind of in this area here. Now I'm going to begin toning this object. And I say toning, it's really just another word for shading. I'm going to be adding charcoal onto this circle, trying to make it into a sphere. And I'm going to be layering charcoal. I start toning an object or shading an object by working at the terminator line, which I see as a very dark area. So I slowly build up charcoal from the terminator line into the darkest area of the object, of the sphere. Lightly shade into the bright areas a bit. We want to integrate the dark and the light areas together to create a smooth transition. I'm going to blend my charcoal with my finger. You could use a paper towel, a tissue, anything that you prefer. Now I'm going to begin adding charcoal to the shadow area. I'll use slightly more pressure where the sphere looks the darkest and less pressure in the shadow areas on the sphere where they look a bit lighter. As I do this, I am constantly looking back and forth from my drawing to my sphere. Back and forth, my eyes are darting back and forth, trying to look at the tone that I'm putting on this piece of paper and comparing it to the tone that's on the sphere itself. Where is it the darkest? Where is it the lightest? I'm going to draw right through that reflected light because I will pull that reflected light back out with an eraser. The reflected light isn't as white as my paper, so I don't want it to be glaringly bright. Now I'm adding and blending the charcoal to create the darkest part of the sphere. I'm going to clean this up just a little bit here. By cleanup, I mean that I'm erasing anything I've drawn or smudged outside my circle, essentially, to keep my sphere looking round and to keep the area outside of it clean. I'm layering this charcoal on slowly and lightly. I'm switching tools now to my 2H extra hard pencil, charcoal pencil, and I'm going to add a little more refined tone in. I'm still just going and drawing tone and shading where I see it darkest, but this is going to allow me to do a little more refinement and a little more precision. Notice that I'm smudging some charcoal into the lighter areas with my finger. I'm trying to create a smooth transition from light to dark. I'm not worried that my drawing of the sphere looks darker than the real sphere. I'll be adjusting the shadow areas so they look more accurate later. Right now, I'm concentrating on shading the entire dark area of the sphere. Do pay attention to how dark and light everything is, and try to mimic that, but don't worry about it too much. I'm going to clean this up a little here before we go on. I'm also going to kind of take away a little bit of that line that's at that lightest area of the sphere. I don't really want it to be outlined. I want it to be toned, shaded. I can still see it there. It's still a ghost, but I'm kind of getting rid of that hard-edged line. Now we're going to pull some of the tone off that we've put on. This is a white ball, and I want it to feel more like a white ball. So I'm going to use my stick eraser to pull tone off. And what I'm doing is creating lines that are relatively far apart so that I can go in and tone with my finger and move charcoal around. Now I'll be switching between the Nitram HB charcoal stick, my General's 2H charcoal pencil, and the stick eraser to draw, and I'm going to blend with my fingers. What we're going to do now is pull tone off, put some more back on, pull some off, and keep on adding and subtracting tone until we get the light effect that we want. So use the charcoal stick when you want to add a lot of charcoal or some texture. Use the charcoal pencil when you want a little more control and finer shading. And use the stick eraser to erase the charcoal if your sphere is getting too dark. Use the stick eraser to both erase tone, but also to move it around. The harder I press, the more charcoal comes off. I'm still looking back and forth from my object on the paper to my still life. Really looking at all of the tones and trying to interpret what I'm seeing. I'm working a little bit with the reflected light now, trying to pull that back in. Again, I don't want the reflected light to be as bright as the form light or the highlight. I'm using my stick eraser to lighten up these areas. Everyone sees the light and the dark areas uniquely, so shade the sphere how you see it. This isn't a quick process. Take your time and really look at the dark and light areas. Constantly compare your drawing to the actual sphere and then try to recreate what you see. This takes a lot of practice. Think about what you're doing as you draw. It's really easy to just start sort of coloring and to forget about what you're doing. I see this area of the ball being lighter than this area. This to me is the darkest area. This area right here and this on my sphere, my still life sphere. This I see is a little bit lighter. I see this as the brightest spot and then light hitting here and coming this way to the dark, but also this reflected light I see coming up and making this whole area just a little bit lighter than this. So I'm working that in here. You'll notice that I'm scraping right through my terminator line into that reflected light. If I were to just scrub in one area, I would create a kind of a hole or a dot of brightness. I want to integrate all of the tone, all of these shadows into each other. So I don't just draw in one little area making hard stripes. I tone through the dark into the light and then also take off color going from the light to the dark. The same with the dark. I'm going to go from the dark into the lighter areas so I don't create shapes or stripes. Now that the ball is close to being the tone I want, I'm not going to use my finger to smear the charcoal as much. I want to kind of preserve the tone it has, and I'm just going to lightly put more tone on, take tone off, but I'm not going to smear it as much. I'm using my kneaded eraser to clean up the edges and outside the sphere. I can shape my kneaded eraser, make it into sort of a point. For this drawing, I'm not going to worry about the highlight, which sits about here on our ball. I'm combining the highlight with the form light. This ball is not that shiny, and I want a nice bright area here. We could just continue to tone and shade this object so that we just saw that really bright highlight, and that was the whitest part of our paper, and then everything else around it was a little tiny bit darker. But I don't think that's necessary to get a pleasing ball shape. My goal is to depict what I see and draw the shadows accurately, but I also really want to create a pleasing drawing that feels right. I'm going to work just a little bit more on this reflected light. Now we're going to move on to the cast shadow. And the cast shadow is the shadow the object casts onto the surface that it's sitting on. What I do is try to visualize it with my pencil I'm not drawing any line. I'm just going from where I think the shadow starts and literally drawing in the air where I think it's going to be. Thinking about where it starts, how far it goes away from the sphere as it arcs in and comes back, and where it hits on the side. The shadow itself has some darker areas and some lighter areas, and the outside of it is a little bit amorphous, a little bit fuzzy. Now I'm going to draw, or try to draw. Keep visualizing and air drawing the shape of your cast shadow a few times, then try to let yourself just draw it. Don't overthink it, just draw it. You've visualized it and you know where it needs to go. I'm going to adjust it until it feels right. I find cast shadows to be difficult. I know that this is the ball shape, but it isn't circular. It's an ellipse that I'm trying to draw in here, but it's not easy. I'm going to adjust it quite a bit here until I get it so that it feels right and looks right. I'm drawing lightly with this tool. But again, it's not easy. All right, I'm going to go with this for now, and we'll see what it feels like once we start shading and toning the shadow. I'm going to begin with the Nitram charcoal stick to start toning the shadow. And I'm going to just tone it in like we did the sphere. So that's our basic tone for the cast shadow. Now I'm going to refine the cast shadow. I can see the cast shadow looks darker here, right behind the ball. It's very dark under the ball where the ball sits on the tabletop. But then everything else is sort of fading out from there. The first thing I'm going to do is look at that dark area behind the ball. And I'm actually drawing the tone right into the ball. Like we combined the tones in here, I'm combining the shadow tone right into the ball. I'm trying not to tone it, to combine it too much into the reflected light, but I'm pulling it into there as well. I want the shadow to pull out of the ball. I don't want it to look like it's separate from the ball. I want them to be combined. I want them to merge in a little bit. We all see light and dark very differently. You may see more dark or light areas in the cast shadow than I do. You may see less. I'm shading the cast shadow as I see it. So the shadow on my paper may look different to you than the shadow in the photograph. Work on shading the cast shadow as you see it. All right, I think that's where we're going to leave the shadow for now. To end this lesson, this drawing, I'm going to put a little bit of indication of where the tabletop is. And the tabletop doesn't physically touch my ball, but it visually touches it. So as I look past the ball, I can see where the tabletop appears to touch the side of the ball. So I'm going to put an indication of that in on both sides. I know that the tabletop is flat, so I'm going to just do a measurement or a line here. And I'm going to give the wall behind the ball a little bit of tone. Just to give our sphere a little bit of context and to really sit it down onto the table. So the last thing I'm going to look at here is whether my tabletop looks like a straight line behind my object. I'm going to do a little measure or a little comparison here with my pencil. And I can see that this just needs to come down just a little bit. You just keep adjusting it, changing it, altering things until it looks and feels the way you want it to look and feel.